Marvel Snap's newest game mode, Sanctum Showdown, was announced yesterday. It's planned to start on February 18th. It's going to bring 3 new cards into the game, and reactions so far have been extremely positive, in part because it looks like it might be an incredibly generous mode. I'll talk about that a little bit later. First things first, let's talk about the 3 new cards that Sanctum Showdown is bringing to the main Marvel Snap game. First things first is Laufey, a 4/5 with the ability to steal 1 power on reveal from each other card here. This looks like it applies to both you and your opponent's cards. I think of Laufey as a bit of an upgraded Spider-Woman. This is effectively a 4/13 if you play it on a full lane. 4 is also a very good cost for the decks that tend to be keying off of things like this. Hazmat decks really enjoy having a 4 cost big guy in order to play alongside their big 2 drops that are very important. Being able to play Laufey Hazmat on the final turn of the game is very interesting. Downsides include the fact that it will hit your stuff as well, but that is basically net neutral value for you. And this does mean that this card is going to be generically a very solid, very good card for any deck that is interested in a big 4-drop. There are plenty of big 4-drops that exist. I'm almost tempted to wonder if this guy can get big enough to be a card that wants to be run in various Ares-style thirder decks, where this guy can actually get up to 10 depending on how you want to actually distribute your power. Playing stuff like Squirrel Girl could be helpful there. Getting your triggers on Surtur and Scar, very meaningful. I don't know if that's going to be what he actually is, but at baseline, this is just a brute good 4-drop. Note, of course, that if a Luke Cage is face up on the board, this card will not steal from any of your opponent's cards, and will in fact only be stealing from your cards because of the way the steal mechanic works. Similarly, if you have a Luke Cage up, it will not gain any power from any of your cards, as far as we know. Again, the steal mechanic works such that if there is a Luke Cage preventing the taking, you're not going to gain anything because steal is 1-to-1. If I'm gaining 1 power, it's because I'm taking it from something. So if the taking never happens, then the stealing never happens, the gaining never happens. That said, this looks like a fairly generically strong card, and perhaps the strongest of the 3 cards that the game is going to get from this game mode. Again, we'll talk a little bit about the distribution method for that later. I think right now I want to focus specifically on how these new cards are going to be. Are they going to be good? That's what we're talking about here. And this is probably the one that is the easiest to look at and say, yeah, I can see that being relevant. Next up is Uncle Ben, a 1/2 with the ability that when it is destroyed, replace it with Spider-Man, for those who are unfamiliar, which I hope is nobody. Spider-Man is currently a 2/4 with an on-reveal ability that moves it and another card on your opponent's side of the board to another location when it spawns. In other words, this is effectively a Bucky Barnes that makes Spider-Man. But what actually seems appealing about this card to me is it is a Killmonger card, and there are mid-range decks that have been in the past interested in running Killmonger or Hydra Bob and can't run both because they are sort of conflicting. This is the card that allows you to run a Hydra Bob effectively in your Killmonger decks. And I think that's kind of nice. It's actually, I think, getting a little bit underrated. I'm not going to say it's going to be an incredible card that does a bunch of incredible stuff, but that is actually a very defined role, and we have had decks where I have had to choose between having a Killmonger package and having a good 1-drop that I actually like curving out into. And having this as an option is non-zero. It's actually like, oh, okay, I have a 1-drop in any deck that I want to run Killmonger in, and I don't have to feel bad about it, right? This is actually just, good. And it's not like something I need to go out of my way to have Killmonger in order to mitigate the downside of, like the Hood or something like that. This is a 1/2, and sometimes it has 2 extra power when you blow it up. That's actually just a pretty reasonable value proposition. If you have the room in your mid-range deck and you're just looking for cards to run and you want to put that Killmonger package in, this guy could very well go with it. I do think that he ends up being the kind of thing where it is if the meta calls for Killmonger, he comes alongside Killmonger in some decks that care about getting points on the board, that want to be able to do stuff like that. I think this card is getting a little bit underrated. Like, there's a real role here. It's not going to be the world's most relevant role all of the time, but I actually think that of all the cards in this pack, this is the card that has the most specific role, or I guess maybe not the most specific role, but like a role that I can see being relevant, let's say 1 out of every 3 months the game plays, and then just not really mattering the rest of it. Whereas a card like Laufey is about generic value and can get outclassed by other things that are generic value cards in the future. This is a card that I think is in such a unique space and niche that it will end up being a reasonable addition to your collection basically no matter what, but it will definitely not be a build around. It will rather be part of something else that the meta determines whether or not it is relevant, not you. Next up is Gorgon, a very strong tech card against things like Arishem and the various Victoria hand decks. This is a card that you're going to be happy to just have in your rotation in case it ever gets to be relevant. But I do think one thing I've learned about tech cards, especially tech cards that are just like on-rate stats or kind of okay, is they need to be hyper-relevant or you need to have some other synergy for them to actually be worth running unless the metagame is dominated by stuff that they hit. Which is to say, I think Gorgon is going to be a nice card to have, but ultimately it's going to be a bit of an ask for you to get him in your deck. Now, granted, at 2-3, this is a much better stat line than something like Mobius M. Mobius, which is perhaps the hardest of the tech cards to actually run because of just how bad it can be and just how little cube equity is involved in it. Gorgon has a similar dynamic, where the cube equity is basically in being able to snap this card against certain decks, and then they're probably not going to stay unless they can win. This card is a roadblock, but not a guarantee, compared to something like Shang-Chi or Cosmo, where the cube equity can come on turn 6, where it is inherently more valuable as a surprise. Cards like Mobius and Gorgon that have to be face up are not necessarily less valuable, but they are something that requires a certain metagame to justify them. Whereas you have things like Luke Cage a lot of the time, where Luke Cage hooks into other things your deck is doing. Luke Cage hooks into your Valentina, Luke Cage hooks into your Anti-Venom, such that it's not just a card that is there to be a tech card, it's a card that is part of a combo that your deck actually has. This doesn't really have that. And when you look at it, I can see it being balanced similarly to Mobius, which is to say, I think it'll be a little bit hard to justify playing a generic 2-3 in a lot of your decks. But if you want to do it, there are going to be decks that can afford to do it. I think Wiccan comes to mind, where it's like if you really want to play a Wiccan deck that is extra good against Kate Bishop's, a Wiccan deck that is extra good against Arishem's, extra good against Agent Coulson's, you can do that, and that is a deck that can afford to run a 2-3 with a little bit of a additional rider on it. There are going to be decks that can do this, and there are going to be decks where it will matter. And I think that it is worthwhile to have this card. A lot of people have been looking at these cards like, oh, they're crap. I don't think these cards are bad. I think basically all of them are going to be cards you're happy to have in your collection, and that's probably a good thing, given what we know about Sanctum Showdown. I front-loaded the discussion about the cards for a pretty specific reason, which is I really wanted to talk about the cards first and then the method of acquisition second. And I think it's important that we acknowledge this, because right now, we don't know a lot about Sanctum Showdown, but I think people are getting way ahead of themselves if they think they're getting 7 free cards. And I think Second Dinner might be setting themselves up for failure here in a really painful way for someone like me who takes a lot of the heat for Second Dinner failures, even though I'm not really involved in them in any way. I get a lot of negative feedback whenever they mess something up, and I am sort of worried that I am about to catch a ton of shit in about 10 days or 18 days or whenever this starts, because people are going to be disappointed and let down. So let's talk about that part, which is the second part of this video, and if I'm honest, probably the major reason I wanted to make this video. These cards will all be available in Sanctum Showdown. This is the new game mode announced by Second Dinner, where it seems like you can acquire points in the game mode itself for winning locations. One location will have a bonus for extra points, and when you hit a certain number of points, you win that game, and the points you score in the game can then be spent in this shop. Now, the number of points that wins you the game is it looks like it's 16 or something, so the most points you can ever get from one game seems to be 15 or 16 or some number that isn't actually very high. Now, that's weird to me, when you look at the numbers in the shop. Because I think people are seeing this, and they're seeing something that might not actually be there. And what I mean by that is a portal pack roll costs about 1,200 of those points. If you want to get all 3 of those cards, that means that you're going to need to play 225 games of this at max point output, meaning getting like 15 or 16 points every single time. It'll be more than 225 games in order to get all 3 of these cards we just talked about free to play from this mode. There's also something that seems like an additional thing that you can get, which are additional unowned Series 4 and 5 cards. Those are priced at 2250 points. I do not think that there is a single possible way that anyone can free-to-play grind all of these cards. There are 4 potential redeems of the 2250 Series 5 and Series 4 thing. I don't think that there's a world in which anyone gets all 4 of those, seriously, without spending money. In addition, there is the ability to potentially clear the base pack, but I don't exactly know what it's gonna be required in order to do that. There seems to be an allusion to a potential stamina or ticket mechanic gating how many times you're going to be allowed to play per day. We don't know any of this for a fact, but there are a lot of answers in Ask the Team that are giving me bad vibes. For example, here is someone asking explicitly, if a little bit rudely, whether or not the mode will be ticket or time gated in some way, and here is what I'm reading is a bit of a non-answer on this from Glenn. Like, they are not willing to go out there and say, hey, it's not ticket gated, hey, it's not time gated, and further, saying that he doesn't want to undermine the marketing team's efforts, I read that as him saying, I don't want to come out here and tell you that it's time gated or ticket gated because someone else is supposed to do that in a nicer way than I will. Here is someone else asking how difficult is it to get everything in the event, and again, we're getting a non-answer. This seems like the kind of thing that if you were doing it the way people seem to be expecting it, you would be happily promoting it repeatedly. If people are like, hey, how easy is it to clear this shop? And you're like, it means it's not easy to clear the shop. Interestingly, here there is also the speculation of a sort of energy or ticket mechanic in the form of scrolls, which are another thing that we saw in the shop available, but it's unclear exactly how much you're able to, I guess you'd say, go infinite in the game mode, being able to continually, like, you know, use your points to buy more scrolls to continue to play. I don't know if that's going to be possible. I don't know how much that's going to ask of you. I don't know a lot of things, but the fact that they're not willing to talk about it is starting to weird me out. This is the one that's probably freaking me out the most. How feasible is it to unlock all of the new event cards? And then the answer being, it's certainly feasible. Like, that seems like not a dodge. Again, it's not like they're dodging these questions per se, but it sort of feels to me like what the answer is going to be is like we can get maybe the 3 event cards, maybe less than that, like 2 of them. And then if you're willing to spend to like play the game mode more or whatever, you'll be able to get a bunch of the rest of the rewards. And I think that that seems to be the direction that they're alluding to as well. I realize I'm reading between the lines here, but when you say something like, it's certainly feasible, but we built the Sanctum Showdown shop to be robust and give players a lot of options, what I'm seeing here is, we don't expect you to clear this shop. You shouldn't expect to clear this shop, and even if you are talking about clearing the shop, you are way off base in terms of where this is actually going to be. My gut says we're getting like maybe 2 free cards and everything else is gonna be maybe paywalled or success walled or time walled that you can pay to speed up or something like that. And I think what's frustrating to me about this specifically is that when you compare this to any other event, that's still better. Like, I think we've gotten a sense of what they want events to be at this point. They want it to be a game mode, they want it to be a distribution method for cards that maybe wouldn't necessarily make the cut otherwise. The only real exception to this rule is the first game mode they ever did, Cassandra Nova, which maybe they just were like, okay, let's launch it high. But I don't think any of the cards we've seen since Cassandra Nova in any of these game modes have been anywhere close to her. And with the sample size that we have, I think I gotta go with the majority here, where it's like, these are cards that are useful to have in the game and useful and kind of interesting some of the time, but they're not Cassandra Nova, and they probably never will be. And so when I look at what this game mode is trying to do, when I try to read between the lines of what Glenn is saying in these answers, when I read between the lines of why they won't talk about this, I come pretty inescapably to the conclusion that everyone who is talking about getting 7 free cards is going to be massively let down and then massively angry. And I am frustrated by that, because when I zoom out, what I see is them setting themselves up for backlash for no apparent reason. That's kind of what I see. When I look at what this is, and I see that people see the potential of 7 free cards, and they don't ever stop to think, hey, isn't that a little too good to be true? Like, isn't this a little much even for the so-called new era of Snap? Like, isn't that kind of a lot, kind of fast? That's a lot of free cards. That would be, if you'll pardon the like very obviousness of this, 7 times the amount that we have ever gotten in an event before. And so let's say, even like at the bare minimum, let's say you're getting 2 free cards out of this. Let's say that, right? That is better than every event before. It's a better outcome. It's a better outcome. We get 2 free cards. That's dope. But the fact that people are already calibrating their expectations at 7, it's freaking me out. Because I feel like there's just no way. I feel like people are suffering from like temporary amnesia as to like what this game is. This is not a game that gives out 7 free cards. They have never done that. They spent a year making series drops be less generous than 7 free cards. You guys are like, this 2-week event will be more generous than a year's worth of series drops? I'm not seeing it. And they keep saying stuff that triggers that alarm bell in my mind that's like, what's going to happen is you might be able to get all 3 event cards and then everything else is for whales, right? And if they do that, I think people should be happy, right? That would be 3 times as good as any event that has ever happened before. But people aren't going to be calibrated that way. They're going to be calibrated as, I expected 7. And I think that's just a huge, huge unforced error right now. This is a game mode that is releasing at I don't know if it's a pivotal time for the game, but I'll tell you that my views are up and my, like, not revenue is up because it's still January, revenue is down, unfortunately, but like my views are up from where they were when I was seriously concerned about my views. The trajectory is up, subscriber numbers are up for me. And this is the kind of thing where, like, as the game is sort of rebuilding momentum in the wake of the blip, I feel like this kind of thing could hit the player base like a kick in the teeth. And I'm horrified at that concept, because obviously when people are mad at this game, not only do they express it at me, which sucks, but also I take probably a financial hit when people leave. And I think I'm just worried, right? Like, these are cool cards, but I don't think we're getting all of them for free. And I don't know when the expectations became calibrated there, but I feel like we swung out of nowhere. And it's starting to seriously freak me out, because when the second they do something that isn't up to expectations, not even that isn't good, right? Like, when you think of it in pure terms of cards, if we're getting 3 cards, that's the best event we've ever had. It's objectively a massive improvement, but it won't be taken that way. It'll be taken as we didn't get 7. And I am already living in fear of that day. I count down the days to when this, like the shoe drops on this with dread. And I guess I'm making this video in part to say, like, hey, these are actually pretty good cards. They're not just something you should expect to get for free. And then in part to say, like, hey, guys, we gotta calm down. And if I'm wrong about this, and it turns out you can free to play your way to 7 free cards, I will eat crow, right? Like, I've been a pretty big second dinner defender for a while now, but I don't look at this and see 7 free cards. I'm just not that optimistic about what this game is, about the people who make it in that context. It's not even like a question of optimism. It's just like, there's no way. And I worry that what we have right now is a sort of bubble of what I would call poisoned optimism of overly high expectations that is going to pop and explode all over me. And I'm worried about that. I actually think these cards are pretty sick. And if I knew ahead of time that we were getting 2 or 3 of them, I would be like, hell yeah, dope event. But because people think that we're getting those 3 cards, a bunch of cosmetics, a bunch of other stuff, I'm worried that they're going to take something that is a dope event and is cool and is unique and is rewarding, and it's going to just kill player sentiment for no reason. And yeah, so that's why I'm making this video. I'm freaked out, y'all. I'm freaked out. And I've also been KM Best. You've been phenomenal. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I realize that I'm probably like the least optimistic person about all of this. Like, everyone is talking about this like their expectations are so high, and I don't want to be the guy throwing cold water on it. And if I'm wrong, I don't know what I'll do. I'll eat a hat. I have a second dinner beanie or something. I'll throw it in a blender, right? Like, I'll do something to demonstrate how wrong I was. To have I don't even call them low expectations of second dinner. My expectations are actually like, I think it's going to be a good event, but not what the people who are expecting 7 cards are going to expect. And I'll do something to demonstrate my contrition if I'm underestimating them. But I really worry that I'm not. And I want to know what you think as well. I think you can tell making this that I'm like a little bit agitated and a little bit worried, stumbling a little bit. It happens, right? Thanks so much for watching. I've been KM Best. I will see you in the next one.